My name is Richard Green. I'm the operations advisor for Samvera and have been with the community since its inception in 2008. And I'm just going to hand over to Robin briefly. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I'm Robin Ruggaber. I'm from the University of Virginia.
And your title?
Oh,
It's a grand
Director
title.
of Strategic Technology Initiatives and Partnerships.
There we go. And what she didn't say, Robin's been with the project or the Samvera community as it now is almost since the beginning as well. So as this slide shows you, rather, we were going to start, if we've been doing this in a face-to-face setting, we would have started with introductions, asked each of you what your goals were for the workshop, what interested you in Samvera, and what sorts of things would you like to know more about. As I said, we're hoping that by the time we've finished, we're going to have something like 50 people on this call, so that it doesn't really work. It's going to take an awful lot of time. So we're going to make some assumptions, but we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end and also between the segments of what we're going to talk about. And we'll make sure that you've got our contact details in case you want to follow up with questions that way. We may not know the answers, but we're pretty certain that we'll be able to put you in touch with people who do, if that's the way it works. So what we're going to cover today, what is Samvera? Because some of you, we realize, are new to Samvera. We'll try and explain that to you. We'll talk a bit about the community. We will talk a bit about the technology, why you might want to adopt Samvera, why your institution or organization might want to adopt Samvera, where you might want to begin, and how to get others involved. And as I said, we'll leave time for questions at the end, but we'll also check between the several segments of the presentation to give you a chance to ask anything that's popped into your head. So, what is Samvera? And we're sort of taking the view from 35,000 feet. It's going to be very superficial. I don't apologize for that. If we were going to make it a deeper dive operation, it would have taken far longer than an hour and a half. But what is it? If you asked a lot of people that, I think they would probably start talking about software. Well, if you ask people who've been with this project for a long time, that's the second thing they say. Because first and foremost, we regard ourselves as a community, working together to solve a common problem, and that is building robust repositories. And right at the beginning, this goes back to 2008, we've been around a long time. Right at the beginning, we decided that the only way to build a rich and robust solution was to engage a large community of developers. And the only way to build a sustainable solution was to spur adoption by a community of institutions with a vested interest in the shared success of what they were doing. So Samvera has come up with solution bundles and toolkits that enable them to do that. So the second thing after the community is that Samvera is software enabling robust repositories fronted by feature-rich, tailored applications and workflows, and we'll unpick some of that as we go along. And what we've done over the last 13 years, 12 years, is collaboratively, build products that can be adapted and modified to suit local needs. And we're going to talk today particularly about Hyrax, Haiku, and Avalon, which may be terms that you've heard. So we're going to look at an overview of the community. We're going to look at an overview of the solutions, and I'm going to very briefly make reference to the costs of running Samvera. Let's start with the community then. Here's a subset of the people who attended last year's face-to-face annual conference at Washington University in St. Louis, themselves very much a subset of the community at large. This year, forced online, which has had its pros and its cons as it turned out, more than 300 people have registered to take part in the conference at some point. And that, of course, itself is a subset of the bigger community. We've got community partners in the USA and in Europe, and we've now got adopters, and we'll come to the distinction between partners and adopters shortly. We've now got adopters in Mexico, Japan, Hong Kong, and Australia, as well as those in our more traditional territories, the USA and Europe. And we've got people from other parts of the globe joining this virtual conference over the next few days. So we hope the next time we show this map, we might have an even wider geographical spread in the future. Red on the map, the red pointers are partners. As I say, we'll talk about partners shortly. Blue signifies adopters, and green are people using our Avalon software. And we know that there are more institutions and organizations using Samvera-based technology than we've actually got on this map. The scale isn't terribly helpful. Let's explode. I didn't mean that. No, let's not explode North America. Let's increase the scale for North America and Europe so that you can see a little bit more clearly where folks are. I'd remind you that those are the examples that we know of, because one of the challenges of open source software is that you never really know how many people have downloaded it or where they are geographically. And these maps also mask the fact that some of our partners and adopters are not just institutions, individual universities or whatever, but they're actually organizations of national importance. So for instance, the Digital Repository of Ireland, the US Department of Agriculture, there are other examples I could have given. So we're a community scattered worldwide. And any community, if it's going to operate successfully, it needs to have a structure. So Robin will talk about this in more detail later on, but just very briefly, there is a steering group, 9 people, which is elected by and elected from the partners. And that group are effectively the stewards of the project. They're individuals. And in a sense, their purpose is to backstop the rest of the community, for watch for things that should be going on, should be being done, that maybe aren't, and nudge things along to make sure that they do, in fact, get done. But then we've got partners. Partners are organizations using Samvera software, part of the community, who have actually committed their institution to a formal membership. There is actually a legal document. And we'll talk about that in more detail a little later on. Then we have working interest groups, and this actually is where most of the work within the community gets done. We spin off a group to deal with a particular problem. The group may have deliverables, in which case it's a working group. It may be just a place where individuals can discuss what might be done in the future, and that is what we would call an interest group. It has no formal deliverables. But it's exploring problems and may very well spawn a working group later on that decides to address some of those in a tangible fashion. Then clearly we have the committers, we have the people writing the code, our developer community. And beyond that, we have people who are using our software, but are not, how should we put this, formally aligned with the community in a sense necessarily. And we describe them as adopters. And working with all those, and again, we shall come to this a little later on, we now have a full-time community manager who's on the call, actually, Heather Greer-Klein, and she will be doing a lot of coordination across those groups as time goes on. That's a list of the partners. I'm not going to insult you by reading it to you, but you can skim down it very quickly yourselves, and you'll see that it is quite a wide range of institutions. Yes, quite a number of them are universities, but you will have a broadcasting organization, WGBH, the public broadcaster in Boston. You have several service providers in the software community tucked in there. You have the Digital Repository of Ireland that we were talking about earlier on, which is not, although it's associated with an Irish university, is not actually a university in its own right. It's a national organisation. And so, and so on. You can, as I say, read that list for yourselves. 32 of them at the moment. And what distinguishes them is that they not only give staff time and effort to furthering Samvera's work, but they're actually committed to monetary contributions now to cover our running costs, including the community manager post, because that post, the community manager, is now a full-time employee of Samvera, something that the partners themselves asked for, came out of partner discussions, and which they are quite literally footing the bill for. So what's it used for? Who's it used by? Categories. So this is not just the partners now, this is the partners and the adopters. There are large universities, there are small universities. Again, I'm not going to insult you by reading the entire list. But tucked in there, there are government, there's certainly, I think there are now 2 government ministries actually, tucked away there. There are research labs, as I said, broadcasting organisation. So it's not just universities using Samvera's products and contributing to the community, although in fairness, that's the way it started out. It's now reaching a much wider audience in the sort of cultural heritage arena. And they're using it for a variety of purposes. It started out really as a way to, for the founding institutions to make available things like student theses, things like that. That led to us developing workflows so that the students could initiate the deposit of their thesis and have it checked and all the rest of it before it appeared publicly, all sorts of things like that. But we're now getting into digital image systems, media management, media preservation indeed. Research data management is certainly growing steadily at the moment, and other things. As I say, I won't insult you by reading the entire list. So let's take a bird's eye view of the solutions that the community has come up with over the years. This is a very, very, very blocky diagram of what goes on. Samvera draws on a lot of best of breed open source components to make up the entire software suite that we use. We, Samvera, add in a set of what we call core components, tried and tested building blocks that add the functionality that a digital repository solution needs. Some people will also make use of things that are still in development, and that's the block on the right hand side there, Samvera Labs. Often those things in labs, having been tested in 2 or 3 places, make their way into the core components list, just in the sort of normal flow of things. And in building all these components, so-called gems, we follow patterns and Rails practices that offer a way of doing things that the community has coalesced around, and we employ rigorous, continuous integration testing. Anytime anything new goes into the code, it's run through test suites to make sure it hasn't broken anything anywhere. Above the core components, we have our repository engine. This is the Hyrax that you may have heard of that we'll spend some more time with. And that's designed to offer a set of common configurable core functionalities. As I say, more on that soon. And then tucked on the top there, solution bundles, we'll talk about 2 of those, Haiku and Avalon. So again, watch this space. I don't want to scare you with the next slide, but if we take that apart, it looks a bit like that. So too long, don't read. But basically that just gives you some idea of what's going on in the blocks, and you're welcome to read that at your leisure. We shall make this slide pack available very quickly after we've finished. You can read that. Lots of other open source components, as well as our own gems that contribute to the whole package. As I said, we're going to concentrate on Hyrax, Haiku, and Avalon. So Hyrax. Hyrax is a repository building engine, a toolkit, if you like. It's used by many people, many Samvera partners and adopters, as the basis for building their own systems. And not infrequently in doing that, they involve one of our service providers to help build the system and or host it. But it's also the basis for our own solution bundles, and it's the solid basis for Avalon, and increasingly it's getting integrated with it's the basis for Haiku. I do beg your pardon. It's the basis for Haiku, but increasingly it's getting integrated with Avalon. So quick list there of the again, very 35,000 foot view of what Hyrax does. Custom work types, we'll talk about work types a little bit later. Ways to upload files, access controls so that only some people can get at some parts and other people can get at other parts. Admin dashboards, which enables you to populate the repository and manage what's in there. Configurable workflows, because different people, different institutions use completely different and, dare I say, disparate methods for getting stuff into their repositories. In theory, they can all be catered for. Batch upload and editing, because clearly you don't want to upload things one at a time, especially if you're migrating from something else. Google Analytics, full text indexing and searching, which apparently it does twice. I apologize for that. I've copied and pasted once too often. And digital preservation functionalities. So things like fixity checking, version control, characterization of files as you upload them. What is this? Oh, it's a PDF. Okay, we know what to do with PDFs, and so on. Haiku started out as the chief deliverable from a project called, well, we nicknamed it really, called Hydra in a Box. It's not exactly a turnkey product in the way that most of us would understand that term, but it's as close as we get. And hosted Haiku is available from some of Samvera's service providers. And one of the things that they are most interested in is that, yes, it's a Hyrax-based repository solution designed to be easy to deploy and easy to support, but crucially, it offers multi-tenancy. So you can have one software stack supporting multiple repositories. It's actually designed with that in mind, and so it's a fairly robust implementation to make that happen. And again, we'll talk about that a little later. And I say it's not entirely turnkey, but it is optimized for deployment with Docker and AWS templates available if you've got people who know what to do with those. And finally, well, finally for now, the third of them, Avalon is a platform for managing and providing access to large collections of digital audio and video. Originally, it was built on those core components that we mentioned, the gems that the community have developed, but increasingly it's moving up one level. It's moving up to the Hyrax level, and sharing code with Hyrax rather than the core components directly, which means in effect that Hyrax can borrow code from Avalon, so we can actually enrich the functionality within Hyrax for dealing with time-based media. And like going the other way, Avalon can take advantage of things that Hyrax has that are useful in their world, the world of audiovisual. What do I want to say? The transition isn't yet complete. That move to Hyrax is still going on, but it's getting there, as we say. And I said that I would touch very briefly on costs. What does it actually cost to get Samvera up and running and use it? Well, there's the good news. Samvera is open source software. Anyone can download it free of charge to use as is, or to download it and adapt it, because the code is all there to be seen and looked at and, as I say, adapted if that's what people want to do. That's the good news, which means I guess there has to be bad news. Oh, I should say that the code is available free of charge under an Apache version 2 license, a very widely accepted license. Yeah, there has to be bad news. Puppies aren't free. If you're giving a puppy and kitten and it's free, it's great, you know that's not true, because there are going to be running costs, there are going to be vets bills, there's going to be food, and nor Samvera in that sense. Everyone has costs. If you adopt Samvera, you're going to have hardware costs, you're going to have infrastructure costs, you may have staffing costs, you may have service provider costs. It all depends how you do it. And so you can't really come along to us and say, if I do it, what's it going to cost me? Because the answer is always going to be, well, how are you going to do it? Because that will affect things terribly. People may well be able to give you guidelines and help you think of things you may not have thought of yourself, but it's a very, very open question. We can't just say, you know, the license is $10,000 a year. That's not the way we work, I'm afraid. So I'm about to hand over to Robin to talk about the community in a bit more detail. But before I do that, are there any questions on what I've said? I'm going to stop the screen share.
Richard, we did have one question in chat right away, and I think it's something that more than one person might be interested. They might not be looking at chat.
I am now.
Carla had asked what the name Samvera means.
Oh, dearie me. Yeah, okay, there's a story here. I'll try and keep it very brief. We started out as the Hydra community because we were trying to build a repository where you had a single body of material and you then had lots of heads, like the Hydra monster. Robin's going to talk about that as it happens. Once we'd reached a certain level of maturity, the Hydra community, the Hydra project, actually, we were calling ourselves at the time, we thought it's really time we trademarked our logo and trademarked the Hydra name. And we tried to do that and were jumped upon by a company in Germany who made factory automation software under the name Hydra. And we tried to persuade them that no one was ever going to confuse the two of us, but it didn't work. So we had a massive consultation, let's call it that, with the community to come up with a new name for us. And let's not go there. You wouldn't believe it. We had a list of about 100, but basically the bottom line is that Samvera won. And as Robin put in the chat, Samvera is actually the Icelandic term, an Icelandic term, meaning togetherness, which we thought for a community was not a bad idea.
And I think in the end, you know, everybody realized that it was a really good exercise. It was an opportunity to rebrand, and it was a lesson learned.
It was. We once we got over the initial shock of thinking, oh goodness, and decided actually to take it as an opportunity, it worked well for us.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So in the next section, you know, we're going to move through this and we're going to go into a lot of the things that Richard gave an overview for more in depth, and he and I'll switch back and forth a little. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is community. Okay, so if everybody has that. And we wanted to talk a little bit about how the community works. So I always like to start out with the visual. And I put partners on the bottom because the partners, the institutions that have really committed to the community, really are the foundation on which everything else is built. All the individuals that come together from those different institutions. And as Richard said, it's the partners that elect steering. We have a fully elected steering body now, and hire the community manager, and we'll talk about that. Richard covered the committers, you know, all the developers in our community that actually build our software, and the interest groups and working groups, which are made up of people from across our community. Talked a little bit about adopters. And then at the very top, there's the community. And that sense of community is really what ties everything together. It's working together that we can make things work. So, you know, Richard talked a little bit about this, but I can't say enough about the importance of having, you know, different institutions come together and basically make this commitment. And it's not only the money and the people, but it's actually the belief that we can pull together as a community and do more than our individual institutions are able to do alone. Very few institutions can afford to have all the developers sustained over time to achieve the kinds of things that we're able to do together. So our partners, and there's 32 right now, really are, you know, the people and the institutions that make the community what it is. We have 32, we have 50 known adopters. As Richard said, you know, there's a lot of people out there, and not many people like to have callback capability in the software stack. But we know of 50 adopters. There's around 20 Avalon adopters, the audio-visual, and these people often go beyond our community. These are people that don't normally come to Samvera Connect, some of them. We know that we have 18 in production, and we have another 2 that are launching. And Richard mentioned briefly the different partners that are service providers. We have 5 service providers, and those people work around the world with institutions. Some of them offer hosting services, all of them offer consulting, some training, and all of them development. So if you're interested and you don't have developers, there are good service providers to help you achieve what you want to do. I wanted to briefly just throw up the names of our current steering group. And I won't read them off, but what I want to point out is the terms that you see out at the end. The Samvera community worked very hard to come up with a way to elect our steering group and to have that rotation of service. So we staggered the terms at the beginning, with some people having shorter terms and some longer, to get into this rhythm so that in any one given year, we're not as at high risk of losing a significant chunk of our steering body. So we have people rotate, and people can also sign up, throw their hat in the ring to serve, you know, multiple terms. At the very bottom, you'll notice that I have Heather Greer-Klein, I forgot to put her middle name there, who is our new Samvera Community Manager. And we're going to talk a little bit more about her. And Richard Green, who kicked us off, is our Samvera Operations Advisor. Both of those people are non-voting ex officio, but they are part of the steering group. I can't say enough, Heather is on the call. Heather Greer-Klein just started with us around the beginning of October, and she is our very first inaugural Samvera Community Manager. We've had people that have served bits and pieces of what we needed a community manager to do, but we've never had one fully hired and paid by the community until now. Heather has a wonderful background. She served in several roles at Lyrasis, which is our nonprofit organization that we work a lot with. And she worked for DuraSpace, including Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for Digital Technology Services, the D7 or the DSpace 7 Release Manager, and the DuraSpace Services Coordinator. So when we looked at everything that she'd done in the past and her, as well as her education, she seemed like a perfect fit for our community, and she has really hit the ground running. So I'd like everyone to welcome her and be sure and look for emails coming from her, because I think she's going to want to connect with a lot of our partner institutions and a lot of people that are interested in joining the community. Richard talked a little bit about this idea that we believe that coming together, we can get more done than we can individually, and that's certainly what all the partners believe. But I wanted to talk a little bit about all the different kinds of people that are in the community. Very often in communities of this kind, you will find people that are developers, that are interested, technologists, and maybe people that are funding the work and working in governance. But this community in particular has got a very rich mix of people. We have software developers. Some of those software developers are code committers, and there's a very good process in place that the developers have actually built on how they accept code committed and how people become core committers on different core components. We have metadata specialists, and I can't say enough about all the work that they do in the community. We have user experience experts, user interface designers. We have project managers, service managers, repository managers, communication experts, and a lot of senior management get involved because they really want to see the community be successful. And they not only get involved in governance, but they also get involved in a lot of the working groups and interest groups. I want to talk about that next. Interest groups and working groups is a framework that's very familiar if you're part of the Research Data Alliance or if you're part of the W3C group. We took this framework that are used and proved out by these other communities, and then we tailored it for the Samvera community. Interest groups are very lightweight, ad hoc groups that anyone can form. It's like you just build out a statement about what you want to do. You get multiple institutions involved. We like to see 3. And if you're interested in the topic, you get together and talk about it and make what you're discussing publicly available. As opposed to a working group, which is very much like a project. It has a scope, it has a beginning, it has something it's trying to achieve, and it has an end. Working groups often spawn out of interest groups, but sometimes they crop up just because the community knows that something needs to get done, and they just form a quick working group to pull together what's needed and accomplish that. To give sort of an example of this, I'd like to talk about the Hyrax interest group in particular and sort of talk about, you know, how that works on the ground and how that relates to a working group. So the interest group provides a leadership and management body for defining what is called the Hyrax roadmap and actively overseeing the execution of the roadmap. And it's the home to the Hyrax maintenance working group. So it does a lot of communication about what the working group is doing. It is not the group that's responsible for getting features added to Hyrax. That's in the working group. There are certain roles within the Hyrax effort that are members of the interest group. We have a technical lead, a community lead, a projects lead, and a product owner to ensure that Hyrax is managed, developed, and promoted in a stable way. And the Hyrax interest group is actually led by that product owner. Now, the Hyrax maintenance working group is where that development takes place. So you also have some of these roles that are part of the interest group involved in that maintenance working group. But again, there's a scope, there's a certain amount of work that they want to achieve. It's laid out like a project, and there's closure when they achieve those goals. Now, I would say that this, because Hyrax is a major software component that or I won't even say component, a major solution that the community offers, the working group may finish something, but then start right back up. So some of these sunset, and then they go into what we call archived, and we have 43 archived interest groups and working groups, and all of this information is available in our wiki. And each one of these interest groups or working groups that are listed here are active, and these are links. So when you download the slides, you'll be able to follow these links and find out what each of these groups are doing. The other one that I wanted to point out is the Samvera metadata interest group. This has been a very active group over a long period of time, and they have achieved a lot of work by forming different working groups. I think they started out as a working group and saw the need for an ongoing discussion, so they turned into an interest group, and then they spawned working groups as needed. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I mentioned that we have 5 different service providers. We have both contact and web pages if those are available, but they are based in different countries. Most of the people are working remotely, so we have people, you know, even if something is headquartered in the UK, you often have people working on it living in other countries. It's a very diverse set of service providers, and you know, maybe you've worked with some of these, maybe you have interest. I would encourage you to, if you want to get some work done with Samvera, or you want some training, you know, reach out to one of these service providers. And please look at their websites. I know that Digital Curation Experts has held many Samvera camps, and they can also tailor it. Like at the University of Virginia, we had some basic knowledge of Ruby on Rails, but we wanted something that was a little more advanced, and we worked with DCE to actually create that more advanced kind of training camp. I wanted to take a moment to talk about the different events. I mean, Samvera Connect, even though it's virtual right now, typically this would be the one time of the year if you really wanted to see what the Samvera community was doing and you wanted to get engaged in deep dive discussions with different people that were involved, either in building core components or building some of these solution bundles, or you wanted to see how they had implemented either Hyrax or Haiku or Avalon, or used any of the components to build something at their institution, this would be the place where you would come to do that. You'll see in this conference that we've got poster sessions, we've got workshops, we have plenary, and then we have a lot of breakout groups and parallel tracks talking about, you know, different things that the community is interested in discussing or exploring. Samvera Virtual Connect happens usually sometime around late spring. That is less content than what you're going to see this week and next week as part of Samvera Connect. It's a briefer meeting, but it is, again, very much like Samvera Connect, but it's a virtual event. A lot of people can't travel in person to get to Samvera Connect. And it's also good to have an opportunity to connect with the different partners and hear more about what they're doing multiple times a year. So this just gives a little bit more flexibility and timely, I guess, a timely event to connect with people, sometimes even planning what you might do in the fall for Samvera Connect. We have 2 partner meetings a year. These are where all the partner institutions try to get together and meet face-to-face. This year, of course, it was virtual. But we come together, talk about the state of the community, talk about common problems, common solutions, things that we want to make sure happen in the coming, well, I would say coming year, but we meet twice a year. So it's really just to take care of a lot of things that we need to take care of in order to keep our community vibrant. There's also these regional meetings, or something that's cropped up, I guess, maybe over the past 5 years, I would say. And these have become really important meetings that different partners have sponsored. Sometimes multiple partners get together. They hold a regional meeting and invite all the people that want to come, but it's really made for the purpose of getting as many people in an area together. And I know that we've had some successful regional meetings, not only in the US, but also the UK. Then we have presentations and workshops like this, and we'll have training camps, we'll have workshops on different things, and all of this gets communicated out over the different channels, whether that's email list or Slack or our website. And then I mentioned training camps several times, and these are not only introduction training camps, it's a good way if you have like new people to get them up to a certain level of familiarity. Like they might come in and they might know a little Ruby, they might know a little Rails or something else that you think is needed for the community. But the training camps are a good way to get them acquainted to how Samvera as a community and how the developers use these languages, and how they could get started and actually working on some of the components. I mentioned in the communication channels, we have different Slack channels for all the different groups. If you looked at that stack that I talked about where we have like the different groups, all of those have Slack channels. There's also Slack channels for different efforts, like a working group or interest group might create a new channel. The email, I should say that the interest groups and the working groups use our standard email list and Slack channels for the most part. Actually, for all of it, I don't think any of them have broken out. And that is really to be as transparent as possible about the work being done. So we use Slack for real-time interaction, email for asynchronous or longer discussions. And then we also have regular community calls. So for every single group, there's Samvera Partners, Samvera Steering, different interest groups, working groups. We all have these calls periodically to move business forward or to discuss things of interest. And then we've already talked about all these different in-person groups. So now Richard was talking about the finances a little bit as an overview and just explaining that, you know, it's free, but nothing really comes for free. But I wanted to talk about some of the other costs. Samvera as a community puts out an annual report now. We also have what some people might call collateral, some people might call swag. You know, we have some of that at our different in-person events. We have, you know, just accounting. You know, how do we take money in for registrations for conferences? How do we pay people like Heather Greer-Klein, our community manager? How do we pay for other events, like if we want a table at a particular conference other than our own? All of those things cost money. It costs money to track, you know, who's part of the community. Richard mentioned that we have a new membership model. That membership model is not only about financial contributions, although it is, and it's laid out sort of by the size of your organization or your institution. So we do have a model. It's very much like something you might have experienced with JSTOR or something else of that nature, but we've modified it for our community. So we're using that model, but not those specifics that are defined in those other entities. So UVA, for instance, pays $10,000 because we're considered a large research institution. This is just started. You know, people right now are putting it in, but it isn't actually something that is required until 2022. And this was to give different institutions the ability to work with, you know, their budgets or on different cycles and to also look at the resources that they're committing to the community. Because another facet of this, in addition to the membership model, is the different people that come to work, which is valued. You know, if you're working as a developer on the core systems, that is something that might augment your money that you contribute. It just depends on the level that people are contributing resources and what they're pointed at. But all of us also come together to work in these interest groups, you know, conference planning, communication, wiki gardening. I mean, there's all kinds of things that people have done in the community, you know, looking at our metadata models, especially, you know, as they relate to our solution bundles or as some component of our technology that the community leverages but doesn't control. But something like the Fedora repository, when it's upgraded, if there's a metadata change that needs to be made there, we have metadata people involved in looking at that. And I mentioned also like the UX and UI. So there's a lot of different ways to resource the project, and institutions, you know, can contribute even if they don't have developers. I guess that's the main point. If you're an institution and you think, but I have no developers, how can I be part of the Samvera community? Well, you can be part of the Samvera community because all of us have expertise outside of software development. So current outlook, I guess because Richard and I have been around a long time, I'm always thinking about where we started with less than 10 people sitting around a table to, you know, hundreds of people working together from around the world in this community, and where we've come with solution bundles. Richard talked a little bit about Avalon, and he's going to talk more about the technology stack, but he was talking about the relationship between Avalon and Hyrax and how they're sharing components, but it's not complete that Avalon is based on Hyrax yet. This has been a long arc looking from building this initial concept of a framework and getting to where we are today, where we have defined solution bundles, we have the sharing. So if you build something in one area, it's leveraged by another. So that's sort of the current outlook, is where we are, you know, looking at how do we have technologies that are sharing code across the different configurations? How do we have something that can be hosted by service providers? Do we have something that's multi-tenancy that can be used, you know, by a wider group of institutions on a common platform? I think as we're looking towards that future where we've got now a new community manager, we're looking at the potential of also hiring a technical lead. And we know that we're going to strengthen this ability for all these different technology components to be things that are easy to install, easy to configure, and easy to stand up consortial solutions. And with all of that, I'm going to stop and ask if anyone has questions before we move on to the technology section with Richard. So I see Heather has already put something in chat. So if any of you want to get in touch with her, that she's provided her email address. Well, with no further questions, I think we'll get into the technology section because Richard has got a really rich amount of information here. I did also want to mention that in the afternoon, there is a deep dive for Samvera for AULs, and there's also one for technology, but I'm going to turn it over to Richard. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. So I want to talk a little bit more about the solutions. Robin just alluded to the fact I was going to do a functionality overview, then look at some hierarchy examples, some haiku examples, and an Avalon example. I'm getting a little jumpy about the time, so I think I'm going to whiz through the stack information. It's fairly well explained in the slides, and so if you download the slide deck later on, we'll show you how, or tell you how to do that. You can read it for yourselves. So I'll whiz through that. So what follows was in any case going to be a rather superficial treatment. If you want more detail, there's a very thorough explanation in a document that Samvera's Roadmap Council produced a year and a bit ago. And the links there in the slides, it's downloadable from the Samvera website, it's downloadable from the Samvera wiki. I recommend you go and have a look at that. It's very, very detailed. Samvera, as we've said now several times, is designed to provide a rich front-end framework, and it's been built traditionally over a Fedora repository, and we've used Solr for indexing that. And we've had a gem called Active Fedora that bridges from Samvera to Fedora, actually gets our software to talk to Fedora. But there will soon be a new one, and here's another term you're going to hear a lot in the next few days if you're joining our presentations, a new one called Valkyrie. And Valkyrie does what Active Fedora used to do, but not just for Fedora. So it will give people the ability to use combinations of PostgreSQL, disk storage, Fedora indeed, solely Solr. That didn't come out right. Just Solr on its own as a data store if you wanted to do that for discovery and storage. A more flexible tool, something that people have been wanting for a while. And then, as I said, we've got the Ruby gems sitting above that. We're dropping in some terms like PCDM compliant data models. I'm not going to go into those. You can read about them in the white paper. But it does provide, as I said earlier in this presentation, other features like characterization, text extraction, derivative generation, that sort of thing, different kinds of files. Then we've got hierarchs above that, which provides user and admin dashboards, upload by cloud providers or a number of other mechanisms. You can integrate citation, production, that sort of thing, file auditing and versioning, access controls, leases and embargoes I'll touch on again. And then above that, your application can be a highly tailored solution built just on the core components, or a lightweight wrapper that's built on hierarchs, or you might even have an out-of-the-box solution like Haiku, or a specialized one like Avalon. Okay. All the code is licensed, as I said earlier, under an Apache license version 2, widely accepted international license for this sort of thing. And all the code commitments that our developers, contributing developers, make are managed through contributor license agreements, so that we know we have the legal ability to redistribute that code to people using our software. But it doesn't take away from them their own intellectual property. They retain the ownership of their IP and grant us a non-exclusive license to use the code, but that means they're free to use it in other places as well, should they so wish. So, take-home messages. Samvera's modular. You can pick and choose from a set of components with different ways of creating your own repository, from simple to complex, from hosted to in-house, and so on. We're opinionated. We use patterns and Rails practices that are widely adopted as a way of doing things, sort of process that the community has coalesced around and helps us make better, more robust code. But it's flexible. With all these components, you can meet quite a wide range of needs. You can plug in bits and pieces that you want. Other people may not want them. They plug in different bits and pieces and so on. And it's always evolving. the functionality of our code extends and it evolves to keep pace, not just with different needs, but with the evolution of the other software components that we, other open source components that we use, things like Ruby and Solar. As they advance, we need to take our code along with them to use their latest features and so on. We're going to have a look then at the top right hand corner of that diagram, if you like, Avalon, Haiku and Hyrax. And we've just got an exact half hour left. I'm going to show you some example sites very quickly. So I need to stop this screen share. Just bear with me a minute. This is going to be messy. I apologize. No, you go away. I don't want you. That's what I want. I played quite a long time this afternoon trying to find a clean way to do this, and I could not. No, that's too wide for most of you. Let's leave it like that. Apologies that you can see odd bits of other things on my screen. If I expand it, it just gets too wide and difficult. We're going to talk about Samvera's own repository later on. There was a time a couple of years ago now where we decided to, in the words of one of our steering group at the time, we needed to eat our own dog food. We needed to be seen to use our own software. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I thought I would just whiz you through one or two sites as examples of our software in use. There are stills of the front pages of these sites in the slide deck that you can use the links to them in your own time. But for instance, Emory University uses our software for theses and dissertations. So if I go in and I'm going to search for homelessness. I left it on the screen. There you go. So you go in, you go to search, you get faceted return on your search, so you can narrow it down. You go in, choose one of those, and yes, it's a thesis. But what I wanted you to look at is the metadata. They've decided to put in their table of contents, but then there's the sort of information you might expect, right statements, schools, departments, and so on and so forth. So very much geared towards that particular task of doing theses properly, if I can put it like that. Completely different one, we have a user in Japan now, a materials data organization who have data sets, big growing field available in their repository. And if you go in, let's just browse them all and just, whoops, you're not supposed to do that. Let's go back, let's try that again. Why aren't we playing? Just give it a second. Oh, okay. Oh, I thought for a moment Japan was just on go slow, but okay, we'll move on. Try it. It was working earlier in the afternoon. It's just typical, isn't it, that it would not work now? But when you go in, you'll find it's a completely different set of metadata, completely different audience. Our software tailored to a quite different need. The King's Fund Digital Archive, based in London, is an interesting example because if we go in and search, I searched earlier for ether, expecting to find references to very old uses of anesthetic and so on like that, but got something rather different. So hit return, again, faceted search. But the reason I show you this one is that if we just choose this top item here, it's in a viewer. Dare I take this full screen? I'm going to. Are you getting that? Yes, okay. It's in a viewer, and if I can work out how to do it, which I would be able to if I moved that, you can actually scroll through the pages of the document page by page, and you can zoom in, zoom out. So if you've got diagrams or pictures or whatever, you've got that facility there. So very much a graphical use of our work. The British Library in London, with a number of cultural heritage organisations, if I can call them that, in the UK, have recently launched a new site called the Shared Research Repository. The front page may not look very exciting, but this is based on haiku. So Hyrax, a layer over, haiku, a layer over Hyrax. And whereas I think it's fair to say that haiku was designed for one stack of software, but then multiple organizations sitting quite independent from each other within that, so ideal for service providers, the British Library and their partners said, well, okay, if we've got all these things in the same stack, we ought to be able to search across the different repositories. So this page we're seeing here is actually sitting over the Museum of London Archaeology site, the Tate Galleries, National Museums of Scotland, and so on. So if I search for, I'm interested in the flowers clematis as it happens, so let's search for clematis. Okay, I get a return. But the interesting thing here, the thing I want to point out to you is, okay, this return is from National Museum Scotland. This is from the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. That's from somewhere in the British Library. So it's actually searching across the 5 or 6 stacks. And yes, if you go in, let's find that one, then you get the sort of thing you'd expect. You get here a research paper with, again, quite different metadata from the sorts of metadata we were previously looking at. And then finally, as an example of Avalon, this is Indiana's University's media collections online. And I'm going to use the facets in this instance, and I'm going to go to genres, and they have a lot of old television commercials. And this first one, a 1959 advert for Ford, is, I think, a little gem. Now, I have to fly, forgive the phrase, fly by the seat of my pants at this stage, because in order for you to hear the soundtrack, I have to unplug my headset. So bear with me, and I hope this works.
You there, what are you doing?
I'm dusting a Ford.
Oh, are you a Ford owner?
No, I'm a dog.
Do you think everyone should be a dog?
Well, that's something everyone should decide for himself. But I do think everyone should be a Ford owner, don't you?
And I hope my headphones are back in and working. Could someone just...
You're good.
Thank you, fine. So, all right, a trivial example. In a sense, I apologize for that, but I fell across that advert by accident this afternoon. I thought it was just lovely. A huge collection of archival film and that sort of thing. But what Avalon does, it doesn't provide you just with a way of bringing together collections of time-based media, but it enables you to annotate them, to have running transcripts beside the video, all sorts of wonderful toys. It's actually a very advanced tool, if I can put it that way. So this is Samvera across all right, I've shown you what, 5 examples, but across a wide range of examples, and you can see that it can be put to a big range of purposes. Now, if I can get back to my PowerPoint, can I do that? Is that going to come up on your screens? Yes, it is. Okay. So if I go back to presenting, so there are the screens. You can see the links there. You can go back to them at your leisure. And there is a list on the Samvera wiki, and again, all the links are there for you when you get the slide pack, of lots of other instances of Samvera software in production, and indeed there is a companion list of sites in development, some of which you can get at the betas for and things like that. You can go explore. Now, I'm going to take you on a run around haiku, and I still am. The difference is I was going to do it live, and because time is running away with this, I'm not going to. I had a set of screenshots just in case the internet was playing up, but I think I'm going to use them in the interest of speed, if you'll forgive me. First of all, a health warning. Samvera's haiku repository is deliberately a very, very vanilla version of the software to give you an idea of what you get out the box. That's one of the reasons we did it. People could go look and see, this is the basics that I can enhance. Most users and most, if not all, service providers have added enhancements to haiku, and people can take advantage of those. So don't expect to be wowed. That just isn't the point. And another health warning, I am not an expert, but because I have put together the repository for Samvera over the last 18 months or so, I've had a lot of interaction with it, and I think it's fair to say, a satisfied user. So if you go to repo.samvera.org, you'll come up with this homepage. It allows you to feature particular works in the repository. It gives you a tab for recently uploaded ones, and you may have a sort of list of priorities within the featured works. You can actually save that order. It also has a feature called called Featured Researcher, thinking that you might be doing reports of research work on this, but like many other features within it, that can be toggled on and off, and because we don't have researchers, it's toggled off here. And on the right hand side, you've got a place where you can explore the collections, because most people bundle together their objects in groups, collections, and you've got a search box and a login, and so on. So yes, never mind. If I search for Ruggaber, thank you, Robin, I get a list of 28 items back. Okay, you can see what they are there. I didn't want those 28, so I can start refining things. If I drop down the resource type facet, I can see that of those 28, 15 of them are other. Interesting. 11 are presentations, there's an audio and there's a poster. Okay, well, if I choose other, then suddenly I've only got those 15, and you can see where I'm going. You can see how it works, and I can add further filters, or I can take filters away to refine it in any way I want. So if I get a large number of returns, I don't have to scroll through them all. I can narrow down what I'm looking for. And actually, it's not on that page, but if I were doing this live, I could scroll down. One of those 15 is that which is the program from Virtual Connect earlier this year, and you won't be able to read it at that scale, but if you look down the metadata, you'll think, okay, why on earth has that come up? I searched for Ruggaber, it's not there. But I remind you that haiku, Hyrax, in fact, underneath, indexes texts as they're uploaded, and Robin's name appears in that document, hence it's come up. So it's quite clever. That was what we call a generic work. The way we've set up haiku as this very vanilla instance, we've only allowed for two types, generic and images. There are other types you can have with different metadata models, and again, they can be switched on and off in your repository depending what you want. But if you pull up an image object, so this one I'd searched for t-shirt, and there's the designs from the conference t-shirts for the last however many years. This is an image, and you'll see we've got the image viewer that you saw when we looked at the King's Fund website, so you can zoom in and do all those nice things with that. So there's a bit of flexibility. Within images, I just couldn't resist putting this one up. If you drop down the language tab, you'll find one labeled Latin. I'll leave you to go and play with that one. It's there, honest. Talking of language, on the home page there, near the login, there is a tab that says English. You can switch language. You can have the site, you can have haiku in German, English, Spanish, French, Italian, Brazilian, Portuguese, and I think that's Mandarin, but I could very well be wrong. If I use the login button, let's look at the admin side very quickly. Sorry, Robin, I'm cutting across you. You get a dashboard. You get the ability to add works, to add collections.
Take all the time you need. because I can make the end piece brief because we've talked about a lot of it.
Okay, well, I'm still going to have to whiz through this if we're going to make it for 1:30. So if I select works, I get a list of the works that are deposited. I can select all works and see them right across the, as an administrator this is, right across my version of Haiku, whoever deposited them. I may not be able to edit them if they're not mine, but I can see them. And if I use one of the select buttons here on the right hand side of the screen, I get the option to edit it, delete it, highlight it on that front page thing, the highlighted works, or to transfer ownership between people if that's what you work. If I go to add new work, as I say, we've only got two types set up in here quite deliberately, generic work and image. I choose one of them. Within the settings there, you can say, no, I also want to be able to select this type and that type, and depends on your users basically and your use case. And works can be created one at a time, and we can also create them in batches. So for instance, if you've got a set of, let's say, the posters from this conference, you can deposit all the posters at the same time, and in the metadata field just fill in the metadata that's common to all of them, and then go into them get them ingested, go into them one by one and just tweak the metadata to reflect that particular poster. Once you get into the adding process, you've got 4 tabs at the top there. There's the basic metadata entry page, which is header descriptions. Here's the files tab. You can add single files by dragging and dropping them. You can add a folder of files. As I say, there's the possibility of batch as well. Relationships, we mentioned that people are going to put things in collections almost certainly, and you can have collections within collections. You can nest them, that's fine. Here you can say, I want this work, this new work, to go into this particular collection. And you've got a sharing tab, which if your Haiku is set up in this particular way, you can allow a work to be shared just with particular individuals or groups of individuals or whatever. And it's worth saying at this point that, of course, it's a non-trivial job, but you can integrate these products with your institution's authentication systems, whatever they may be. And at the right-hand side of those screens, you may have noticed a couple of panels, or a panel showing you 2 bits of it. You can apply embargoes to things that you're depositing, so they're not visible until, or you can apply leases to them so they're only visible until this date, then they disappear. And you can say what happens to them when they disappear. What happens to them? Do they become private to you? Do they become whatever? And you can't do anything with save until you've done 1 or 2 necessary things, like given a basic description, drop the files in, and so on. And you can have at the bottom of the save panel, you can force users to acknowledge the fact that they've read your deposit agreement, if that's what you want to do. And then tucked away at the bottom of the admin screen, there's a whole load of settings which enable you to label bits of the repository the way you want, to put banner images on it, all that sort of thing. And I say there are lots of things you could turn on and off, so proxy deposit, batch upload, whether that's allowed, and so on. I haven't talked about workflow here. Yes, it can be set up to support workflow as well. It's pretty neat, to be honest. And I recommend that you go and play, either with ours, repo.samvera.org, or go have a look at the public bits of someone else's sites. I'm sorry I rushed through that, but we've mistimed this, and I do apologize for that. Robin.
Yes, so why Samvera? And I'm going to make this brief so that we can open up discussion. But basically, all the things I've talked about earlier today, you know, the shared resources, the shared risk, but also the shared advancing of what we can do together. You get the technology, yes, but you also get a really strong network of people that you can reach out to, and that will help you not only with what you're up to with Samvera, but also in a larger sense. You make contacts, you know, that are doing the same kind of work you do, and that is invaluable. This is a sustainable community. You know, we've built it, we're all focused on a core purpose, which is really at the core of any strong community I've ever been part of. We realize that we can get more done together than we can apart, and it's flexible. As we've grown, we've changed. Richard talked about the worldwide presence, which certainly helps if you're thinking about how to shape a project to suit not only one part of the world or one language. We truly want to be multilingual. We want to be a community that is available to everyone. And I talk a little bit about, again, there's something for everyone here. Again, those lists of people that are truly part of our community. You can have an improved architecture, which Richard had said that I would get to this, but rather than having separate siloed stacks, you can have different interfaces over a common repository if you choose. You sort of protect your investment. I have personally had staff wiped out at my institution. And, you know, when we hired new developers back, and we are, you know, fortunate to have any developers, but they could plug back into the community. And the same was true for metadata people or UI UX designers or new managers. You plug them into the community and they've instantly got a network of people that have been not only advancing the solutions while I was out hiring people, which takes a lot of time, but there's training available, there's people working on the solutions, as well as the solutions that didn't stagnate while you were understaffed. So I can't say enough about that. We ensure backward compatibility. We have a focus for security, which is really important right now, and a stable, mature organization and governance model, and adoption of best practices in every facet of the community, not just the code. Talked about this siloed approach versus a repository-powered approach. And I know that all of us have standalone applications, but I guess the point I want to make here is that what Samvera produces makes possible this kind of architecture where you can have one repository underneath, but have multiple applications, you know, over that repository and index. I just wanted to give you a little snapshot to just say, this is an active community. The code is constantly being developed. This is not stagnant, and that's one of the main things that I've always looked at when I was looking at solutions. How viable is it? What kind of future does it have? Is it something that hasn't been touched in a year and a half, or is it something that people are still, you know, evolving? And I did want to say, really, it's all about the people. It's like the people that make up this community are what make it alive. Talked a little bit about this turnover, going together, cross-training. I do want to say something about controlling the runway though. You know, even when I bought something from a vendor, I'd always ask the question, do we have access to the source code? I used to work in core computing for a lot of years for the university. And if a vendor actually offered up their source code, it wasn't that you would always go with that vendor, but it was definitely a positive, because I have often over the years had vendors pull hardware that was perfectly fine, performant, still had life in it, pull that out, pull a solution out, because they had a change in ownership, or they had a change in direction because of someone new that had come in. Samvera and what we build here, you have more control over that future. You have more control over what gets built, when it gets built, how long you can have it in production. You just have a lot more control over the timeline for your infrastructure. And then what do you do when you go back home? These will all be in the slides that you can download, but there's the website, the wiki, the GitHub. There's a repository that Richard went over, and there's also YouTube channels, which have a lot of things, presentations, training videos, etc. And we have places where you can go and check it out and try it out for yourself, the code and docs, demo sites. And honestly, getting on Slack or on one of the email chat lists and just asking people, people are more than willing to connect up with new people and show them how they've used these solutions. Different ways to get involved, which I think I've talked enough about. Training and connecting, we talked about all the different meetings. And really, if you want to be part of this community, come to the events, get on the calls, get involved in an interest group, a working group. It really does help everything move forward. And the only thing I wanted to point out about enrolling others is to think about who you're talking to. A CIO, a university dean of libraries is going to have a much different need for information than, let's say, a person managing a software development team or a software developer. I've worked for people where you only had about 30 seconds to get your message across. The thing that's most important to those executive level people is talking about doing more with less, the control that you have over the solutions, which lowers the risk, and the maturity of the community. The fact that we have an annual report, the fact that we have a full-time community manager, the fact that we have as many partners as we do, and the kinds of solutions that we have, all of that goes into enrolling someone at that level, with just that information. Then, of course, if you're talking to other management or other people that are involved in the technology, that talk is going to be a little bit different. And that is a wrap. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for a few minutes of discussion.
While you're thinking about questions, my apologies that we've overrun.
Yeah, sorry, Richard.
You must. It's different doing it online. But both Robin and I have done this many times face to face with people, but somehow online it takes longer. I don't quite understand that. But anyway, you live and learn.
It's also usually we have a sign that says 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes. Someone's keeping me on track.